What's up, all you wild and crazy 5th grade cats and Miss Gay's class? Mr. Yarber here to give you a rundown. Oh, you know what? Wait. I bet you're tired of hearing from me. You probably at this point think, man, he's giving me videos in science, he's doing this and that. What's he doing in social studies? So, you know what? I'm going to pass this off to an expert. Now, this expert has been in the field for years and years, and he's scarce. It's my buddy, Steve Areno. Steve Areno is going to be the one to give you this information. So it's about the Cold War, and I know you're going to be learning about the Cold War soon. So it's time to get that quick rundown on what the Cold War is from my expert of a friend. Now, this guy's lived it all. He's lived in the Russian mountains. He's lived everywhere. So it's better to hear it from him, firsthand perspective of all the events that actually transpired in this. So he may look a little angry, but don't get scared, students. I promise you, he won't hurt. He's full of knowledge. Enjoy. Hey, Miss Gay's class. It's me, Steve Areno, here to talk to you about this thing known as the Cold War. Now, the Cold War, where do we get the name for the Cold War from? Man, it's mighty cold. I'm glad I got all this fur all over me. The Cold War is this name given to this really long period of time where the U.S. and the USSR had conflict between the two of them. Now, it never really got hot. What I mean by heat is a lot of wars taking place. There was some small wars that took place, but nothing big and traumatic, thankfully. But let's do a quick rundown on this thing called the Cold War. Now, there's some things going on after World War II. First, the United States is a capitalist government, or a democracy government with a free market economy, also known as capitalism. That means that people can make products, sell them, and earn their money, and the government doesn't intervene too much. On the other hand, this thing known as the USSR, the Soviet Union, is spreading this thing known as communism. Now, what is communism? Communism is where the government controls the entire market. That means the government makes all the money, they set the prices, and it's mainly ran by totalitarian dictatorships. That means that your leader has full-blown control of everything. Now, this is the problem. This is what starts to happen. You got the president. You got Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who at the time creates this thing known as the Iron Curtain. Now, the Iron Curtain is this invisible curtain. It's not a real thing. The Iron Curtain was just a metaphor, a simple statement dividing Eastern Europe, which is communism, from Western Europe, which is capitalism. Now, eventually there would actually be a thing that's built known as the Berlin Wall, which divides East Berlin from West Berlin. East Berlin being communism, West Berlin, that's right, good booger, being capitalism. Now, one thing that happened during this time, the U.S. was scared. They were worried this thing that known as communism is going to spread and eventually take over the United States of America. We didn't want that to happen. That's against our foundations as a country. That's not what the founders wanted. So, this thing known as the Red Scare. The Red Scare means that the United States is worried it's going to come and get taken over. So, what happens at this time is Berlin is one single country in Europe, but controlled by 4 different countries. France, Great Britain, the United States, and the USSR, or the Soviet Union. Now, what happened in the summer of 1948 is the USSR says, you know what? People aren't allowed to move anymore. They're not allowed to exchange products. They can't cross between East and Western Berlin. Well, this defies the foundations of a policy that was created after World War II. So what happens? It violates it. So the U.S. gets involved. You know what? President Truman says, what's going on here? What happens whenever this takes place? The people in Western Berlin are starving. They can't get any food. They can't get any products. They are starving. President Truman sends airplanes over to provide food supplies to the people in Western Berlin. This is known as the Berlin Airlift. Well, while this is going on, the USSR, the Soviet Union, says, you know what? We're going to go to China. So communism spreads to China and it takes over. Well, a problem takes place here because North Korea is not far from China. North Korea becomes a communist nation. Well, the United States has an embassy in South Korea, and they're worried that the communists is going to spread to South Korea. So eventually what happens is North Korea does try to invade South Korea. Well, because of a pact created by NATO, which guarantees people's freedom, we get involved. We get involved in this little thing and try to kind of hold South Korea off from North Korea. Later on, in the 1950s, again, along with this thing known as the Red Scare and all these issues taking place, you got this guy known as Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy says, you know what? Russia has sent spies to the United States. We need to find these spies during the 1950s. So people start looking for, or he creates a team that starts identifying these spies that are in the United States. Problem is there's a lot of information that just isn't accurate. So what happens, a lot of people's reputations are ruined in the United States, so on and so forth during this time period because of the inaccuracy of everything that took place. Now, back to the North and South Korea, there was eventually a truce that was created in 1953, so that whole Korean War or Korean conflict did come to an end. Now, what happens, you got this guy known as Nikita Khrushchev. Well, he's the leader of the USSR in the 1950s. He comes to the United States around 1959 or so, but we think things are a little bit calm at the time, but they're not. Because what he does is he supplies the country of Cuba with nuclear missiles. That's right, nuclear missiles. That's a big problem. Because Korea is only 90 miles south of the United States. A nuclear bomb can hit the United States. So people start to get scared. There's a big, massive spread of fear in the United States. People start creating bomb bunkers. Bomb drills are taking place. Because if one of these missiles comes over the United States, it's going to affect tons of people in the United States. Now, along the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, this is whenever it almost really got hot. And JFK says, you know what, you got to stop this. You need to get rid of these nuclear weapons. We know that they're there. But there was never really a fight that took place. Now, another fight that did come about during this time period is called the Vietnam War. What happens during the Vietnam War is you have Northern Vietnam, which is communist, Southern Vietnam, which is not communist. So Northern Vietnam invades Southern Vietnam. Well, we have an embassy there, so we go over there and we try to kind of stop all the stuff that's going on, just like we did in Korea. Problem is, it's really ineffective. We go over there, we launch this thing, lasts for 8 months. At the end of the war, which was about 1975, by the end of that war, millions of Vietnamese people had died. 60,000 plus people, soldiers, U.S. soldiers, had died during this occurrence. And eventually, Southern Vietnam would fall to Northern Vietnam to be unified under communism, which is what takes place in 1975. I know this is a lot of information to throw at you. This is just a brief period of history to give you a quick rundown. So some key takeaways. First off, the Iron Curtain is a metaphor that divides Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Eastern Europe being communism, Western Europe not being communism. The Berlin Wall is a physical division between Eastern Berlin and Western Berlin. Okay, what really starts all this stuff is the fact that the USSR says you can't transport products anymore, so people in Western Berlin, they suffer. You have key clay rollers in this. Winston Churchill, JFK, President Harry Truman, Lyndon B. Johnson, all these different presidents, until finally the Berlin Wall will fall in the 1990s, which you get to learn about a little bit later on. Hope you enjoyed this, students. Keep an eye out for me in the woods.